The call came on a Tuesday morning. 3 months after my best friend Ray was buried, I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The way I'd been spending most mornings since the funeral. 63 years old. Retired. And suddenly not sure what to do with all the quiet that comes when you lose the person who knew you better than anyone. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. Mr. Daniel Holt. Speaking. This is Patricia Owens. From Owens and Garfield Law. I was Ray Caldwell's attorney. He left specific instructions for me to contact you exactly 90 days after his passing. She paused. He left you something. He asked that you come to my office alone. And he was very specific about one other thing. I gripped the phone tighter. What's that? He said. And I'm reading directly from his written instructions here. Do not tell your wife, Serena, that you're coming. And do not tell her what you've received. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Mr. Holt, are you still there? I'm here. I said. I'll be there this afternoon. I hung up and sat very still. Outside the window, a cardinal landed on the bird feeder. Ray had helped me build the summer before his diagnosis. Ray had laughed the whole time, telling me I was holding the drill wrong. I could still hear him. Why would he say anything about Serena? Ray Caldwell and I had been friends for 31 years. We met at a job site in Beaufort, South Carolina. I was a project manager for a mid-sized construction company, and he was the civil engineer who kept pointing out everything my crews were doing sideways. We argued for 2 weeks straight before we went out for beers and realized we liked each other enormously. We fished together. We drove to Georgia every fall to watch football games. We had no business caring so much about Eni. When my first marriage ended and I didn't leave the house for 2 weeks, Ray showed up with groceries and a terrible attitude and refused to let me disappear into myself. He was the kind of man who called you on your birthday at exactly the minute you were born because he'd written it down somewhere years ago and never forgot. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 14 months before he died. He fought it with the same stubborn practicality he brought to everything, showing up to every appointment on time, asking every question, doing everything the doctors said. But pancreatic cancer is what it is. By the end, we both knew. I visited him in the hospital the week before he passed. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, but his eyes were sharp. They were always sharp. He held my hand and told me he loved me like a brother. I told him the same. Then he said something that I filed away without fully understanding at the time. I did what I could. Danny, the rest is up to you. Just pay attention. You were always better at the details than you gave yourself credit for. I thought he was talking about life in general. The way dying men sometimes speak in a way that sounds like it means everything and could mean anything. I was wrong. He was talking about something specific. Patricia Owens was a small woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and an office full of files that looked like they each had a story. She shook my hand and got right to it. I appreciated that. She set a sealed envelope on the desk between us. Letter-sized. Thick. My name written on the front in Ray's handwriting, that cramped, architectural print he'd had since college. He brought this to me personally. 8 months before he died, she said. He was still driving himself then. He sat in that chair, handed me this envelope, and told me to hold it for exactly 90 days after his death before contacting you. Not a day earlier. Did he tell you why 90 days? He said. And I'm quoting, enough time for things to move. But not so much time that it's too late. She folded her hands. I didn't ask him to elaborate. It wasn't my place. I picked up the envelope. My name in his handwriting. I had to breathe through my nose for a moment. He also asked me to tell you one thing verbally before you opened it. She looked at me directly. He said, I'm sorry I didn't find a way to tell you sooner. I needed to be sure. And I needed you to be safe while I was still here. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a USB drive and 4 pages of handwritten notes in Ray's print. I looked up at her. He said you'd want to read it privately. She said. She stood up. Take all the time you need. I'll be just outside. She closed the door behind her. And I started to read. Ray's handwriting was steady. Even at the end. He must have written it early. When he still had his full strength. Danny, if you're reading this. Patricia followed my instructions. Which means 90 days have passed. I'm sorry I'm not there to tell you this in person. I tried to find a way. More than once. But every time I tried, I thought about what might happen to you if I was wrong. And then I thought about what would definitely happen to you if I was right and said nothing. I chose to say nothing while I was alive. I'm saying everything now. The USB drive has copies of everything I found. Read my notes first. Then look at the files. You're going to want context before you see the documents. Here's what I know. About 14 months ago, right around when I got my diagnosis, I was at your house while you were still at the hardware store. Serena asked me to help fix a problem with her laptop. The email client had crashed, and she couldn't access her messages. I got it working again. While I was doing that, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, an email. I only caught part of it before the screen refreshed. The name of the sender was someone called N. Parrish. The subject line said Re. The timeline after D. Signs. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a real estate thing. You'd been talking about the beach property. But it bothered me. You know how I am. Over the next few weeks. I looked into it quietly. I have a cousin who works in financial compliance. I didn't tell him everything. I told him I was looking into something for a client. And he helped me understand what I was seeing. Danny, Serena has been moving money, not all at once. Small amounts. Over about 18 months. Transferred through 3 different accounts. One in her maiden name. One in the name of an LLC you've never heard of. And one that traces to an address in Costa Rica. The LLC is called Hargrove Coastal Properties. You are not listed anywhere in its formation documents. On the USB drive, there are account statements, transfer records, and a photograph. The photograph is of Serena and a man I was able to identify through a contact at the county assessor's office. His name is Nicholas Parrish. He is a licensed contractor based out of Hilton Head. He and Serena appear to have been in contact for at least 2 years. I also found something else. Your life insurance policy, the one you updated 3 years ago, the beneficiary was changed 8 months ago. The original beneficiary was your son, Michael. It was changed to Serena exclusively, with a secondary beneficiary listed as Hargrove Coastal Properties. Danny, you did not make that change. I pulled the processing records. The change was submitted through an online portal using your login credentials. I had someone check the metadata. It was submitted from a device that has never been associated with you. I'm sorry. I've gone back and forth about whether I was seeing what I thought I was seeing for months. But I've looked at it from every angle. And I keep arriving at the same place. The files are all on the drive. Everything is labeled. I'm sorry I'm telling you this way. But I needed you to find out when I couldn't be taken out of the picture first. That was the only way I knew to keep you safe while I was still breathing. I love you like a brother. Danny, don't let her win. Ray. I sat in that office chair for a long time. The window above Patricia's desk looked out onto a small parking lot with a crepe myrtle tree that had just started to bloom. I stared at it without seeing it. 31 years of friendship. And in his last year of life while fighting cancer, while going to chemo, while knowing he was dying, Ray had spent his remaining energy trying to protect me. I drove home. Serena was out. She'd said she had a hair appointment and then errands. I went straight to my study and locked the door, and plugged in the USB drive. Ray had organized everything. The way he organized every project I ever saw him work on. Folders. clearly labeled. Dates on every document. I looked at the account records first. I don't have a financial background, but I have spent 40 years managing construction budgets, and I know how to read numbers. What I saw made my stomach drop slowly, like something falling from a very high place. Over 22 months, approximately $260,000 had moved out of accounts connected to me, to Serena, or to our joint household through a series of transfers that would look like normal bill payments or investment activity to anyone not looking carefully. The LLC Hargrove Coastal Properties was the final destination for most of it. Then I opened the photograph. It was taken from a distance. Clearly not staged. A restaurant patio somewhere. Midday. Serena in a blue dress I recognized, and a man, across from her tall, somewhere in his mid-50s. Dark hair. They were leaning toward each other across the table in a way that said everything. Nicholas Parrish. I looked him up. His contracting company had done work in the Sea Pines area of Hilton Head for about a decade. Clean record. Decent reviews. A man of no particular note. The last folder on the drive was labeled Insurance Read Carefully. Ray had pulled the actual policy documents. The beneficiary change was time-stamped 14 months ago. Processed on a Wednesday at 11:42 inches the morning. I checked my own records. That was a day I had driven to Columbia for a site walkthrough on a job I'd taken on as a consultant. I had been gone from 6 in the morning until after 9 at night. Serena had been home alone. I sat back in my chair and thought about my life. We'd been married for 9 years. She was my second wife, 12 years younger than me. I'd met her at a charity gala my company used to sponsor. She was warm and funny and lit up every room she was in. And after so many years of quiet since my first marriage ended, she felt like something I hadn't dared expect. I thought about small things now. The way she'd encouraged me to increase my life insurance coverage 2 years before the beneficiary change, framing it as responsible planning. The way she'd taken an interest in my estate documents, not demanding, just present and curious. The way she'd pushed gently for me to see a cardiologist about a few irregular readings that turned out to be nothing, but which had meant multiple appointments and multiple rounds of tests that I'd gone to alone. I thought about our finances, which I had mostly left to her because she'd said she enjoyed managing the household accounts, and I'd been happy to let someone else handle it. I thought about how convenient I had made myself. I thought about Ray, sitting across from a doctor, learning the worst news of his life, and then spending the next months quietly building a case to save mine. I put my head in my hands and I stayed like that until I heard Serena's car in the driveway. I kept everything normal for 3 weeks. This was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. And I want to be honest about that. I am not a man who is good at pretending. I say what I think. I have never been able to play poker. And my son Michael used to joke that I had the least useful poker face in the history of the game. But Ray had written one final line at the bottom of his notes, below his signature, in smaller letters as if he'd added it as an afterthought. Don't move until you've talked to someone who knows what they're doing. Don't tip her off. Evidence disappears faster than you think. So I smiled over dinner. I asked about her day. I slept on the far edge of the bed and told myself it was a bad back, the way I sometimes did, and in the mornings, while Serena was still sleeping, I made phone calls. The first was to my son Michael. He lives in Raleigh with his family. It was one of the hardest calls I have ever made, telling your child that the woman in your life may have been systematically dismantling your future, while positioning herself to profit from your death. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Dad." I never wanted to say anything, but I never trusted her. He drove down that weekend, and we sat in his truck in a parking lot by the marina, and I showed him everything on Ray's drive. He held himself together the way young men do when they're trying to be strong for their fathers. His jaw was tight the whole time. "Tell me what you need me to do," he said. The second call was to a forensic accountant whose name I got from an attorney friend. She spent a week going through the records Ray had compiled. And then additional records she pulled through proper channels. When she came back to me, her assessment was precise and grim. The transfers were structured deliberately to fall below automatic reporting thresholds. The LLC had been set up using a third-party service, with a registered agent in Delaware. The policy change had been executed using my login credentials, but from an IP address registered to a mobile device, a device that had been active in our home's Wi-Fi network. On that Wednesday, I was in Colombia. It was Serena's old phone. She'd upgraded 6 months after the beneficiary change. The old phone, apparently disposed of, but the metadata didn't lie. The third call was to a private investigator based out of Charleston. His name was Walter Burke. He was retired law enforcement. Short, quiet, with a handshake like a vice, and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. "How long has the money been moving?" he asked. "Best we can tell. About 22 months. I said. He nodded slowly. "That's not a crime of passion. That's planning." He looked at me. "You understand what you've walked into?" "I think so. The question is, what's the endgame for her?" People who plan this long usually have a hard stop in mind, a point at which they're ready to move. He paused. "The offshore account, the LLC. She's building a place to land. That means she's probably getting close to thinking she has enough." The idea of what enough might mean, in this context, did not need to be spoken out loud between us. Walter put together a surveillance file over 2 weeks. Nicholas Parrish had driven past our house 3 times in a month, never stopping. Just passing. He and Serena had met 4 times at a rental property in Bluffton that the LLC had listed as a business address. Walter got photographs. Clear ones. We went to the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office on a Thursday morning in April. Me Hef, Walter, the forensic accountant, and my attorney, a man named Frank who I'd used for business matters for 20 years and who became, in that conference room, the most important person in my life. The detective who heard us out was a woman named Consuelo Marsh. She was thorough and unhurried, and asked good questions. She spent a long time with the financial documents. When she looked up, her face told me what I needed to know before she said a word. "We're going to need a few days to get our own warrants and verify the chain of evidence." She said, "I want you to go home. Act normal. And call me the minute anything changes in her behavior." "What counts as a change?" I asked. "Packing. Asking about your schedule in unusual ways. Anything about travel." She paused. "Anything that feels like she's accelerating." I went home. 6 days later, on a Sunday evening, Serena told me she was thinking of visiting her sister in Asheville for a few days. Her sister, whom, to my knowledge, she hadn't spoken to in 2 years, after some falling out she'd never fully explained. I said that sounded nice. I called Detective Marsh from the driveway, sitting in my truck with the engine off, watching the kitchen light through the window. "We're ready." Marsh said, "Can you get her to stay through tomorrow morning? I can try." I went inside and said I'd love to make her a nice dinner before she left, like we used to do. She smiled and said, "Of course." That was sweet. She helped me set the table. I thought about Ray building that bird feeder, laughing at me holding the drill wrong. I got through the dinner. At 7:45 the next morning, 2 sheriff's deputies and Detective Marsh came to the door. Serena had her suitcase by the staircase, a bag she'd apparently packed after I fell asleep. She was dressed and ready. She looked at me when she saw them. Just looked at me. Something in her face that wasn't surprise, so much as the acknowledgement that a game had ended. "Serena Holt," Detective Marsh said. "You're being detained for questioning regarding allegations of financial fraud." identity theft, and beneficiary fraud. Serena did not say anything. She looked at me for another moment. Then she looked away. And she didn't look at me again. The investigation took several months. The DA built a case that eventually included wire fraud, identity theft, and criminal conspiracy. The latter, because Nicholas Parrish was charged alongside her. His phone records placed him in direct communication with her on the day the beneficiary change was filed. He had helped her set up the LLC. He'd been the one to open the Costa Rica account. Serena was convicted on all major counts. She was sentenced to 11 years. She'll be in her early 50s when she gets out. Assuming good behavior, Parrish received a shorter sentence in exchange for cooperation, which is a deal I had no control over and try not to think about too much. The money, most of it was recovered. The LLC was dissolved. The offshore account was seized. My son Michael, who had driven down to be with me the day of the arrest, stayed for a week and helped me do the quiet work of restructuring my finances and changing every account, every password, every document. He didn't say much about Serena. He didn't need to. Some things don't need narration. I sold the house. There was nothing wrong with it architecturally. But there are houses you can't live in anymore. And that was one of them. I bought a smaller place outside of Beaufort, closer to the water, with a screened porch that faces east. I have coffee out there every morning when the weather allows. Sometimes I watch the birds. I drive to the cemetery on the last Sunday of every month. Ray is buried under a live oak at the edge of the grounds, which feels right for a man who spent his life understanding how structures bear weight. I bring 2 cups of coffee, which is probably strange, but it's what I do. I sit in the folding chair I keep in my truck and I talk to him about whatever is happening that month. His granddaughter started walking. The Braves had a decent stretch in August. Michael is thinking about buying a boat. And I think he's making a mistake, but I told him I'd help him shop for it anyway. I told Ray about the sentencing. I told him what the detective had said, that without his documentation, without the care he'd taken to label every file and source every record, it would have been nearly impossible to build a case as quickly as they did. That his evidence had been the foundation. I told him I was sorry I didn't notice sooner, that I thought about all the signs I probably missed, the small inconsistencies I'd explained away. The gut feelings I'd told myself were irrational. Then I thought about something he'd said to me once, years ago, on a job site where a retaining wall had failed because of a flaw in the original soil assessment. I'd been beating myself up about not catching it earlier. He'd told me, you can't fix the past, Danny. You can only build better on what's underneath you now. I'm trying to do that. I joined a grief group at the community center partly for Ray, partly to process everything else. I don't talk much, but I show up. There's a woman there whose name is Elaine, who lost her husband last spring. And we've had coffee twice after the meetings. It's nothing dramatic, just 2 people in their 60s sitting across from each other and figuring out what comes next. I'm not sure what comes next. At 63, I've stopped pretending I have a clear map, but I wake up every morning. I drink my coffee on the screened porch. I watch the light change on the water. A man is still here because his best friend, in the last year of his life, chose to spend some of his remaining strength making sure of it. I don't know how to repay something like that. I'm not sure repayment is the right frame for it. What I know is this: I try to be present. I try to pay attention to the people I love. I try to be the kind of man who, if it came to it, would do what Ray did. I try to deserve the friendship I was given. That's all I've got. And some days, that feels like more than enough.